The clock on the wall showed 5:30 p.m. when Elena pushed through the heavy kitchen doors of the Regency Grand Hotel. Her feet already hurt, and the evening hadn't even started yet. She'd been on her feet since morning, helping set up for tonight's big event, the annual gala. The one night of the year when the richest people in the city gathered under crystal chandeliers to write checks and feel good about themselves. Elena grabbed a clean cloth from the supply closet and headed toward the ballroom. The transformation was almost complete. What had been an empty space just hours ago now looked like something out of a fairy tale. Round tables draped in cream-colored silk filled the room. Each one had a centerpiece of white roses and gold candles, the kind of flowers that cost more than Elena made in a week. She started wiping down the tables near the stage, making sure every surface sparkled. That's when she saw it. The piano. A gorgeous black Steinway grand piano sitting center stage under a spotlight. Elena's hand froze mid-wipe. She stared at the instrument, her chest tightening with an old familiar ache. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice made her jump. It was Thomas, one of the other servers who'd been working there even longer than she had. Yeah, Elena managed, forcing herself to look away. Really beautiful. Some famous pianist is playing tonight. Apparently tickets sold out in 2 hours. These people are paying $5,000 a plate just to hear him play. Thomas shook his head. Can you imagine having that kind of money to throw around? Elena couldn't. $5,000 would cover her rent for 3 months. It would pay for her brother's medication with money left over for groceries. But these people would spend it on one dinner without thinking twice. As the evening approached, the staff gathered for their final briefing. The hotel manager, Mr. Peterson, paced in front of them, his face serious. He was a tall man with gray hair and the kind of voice that made you stand up straighter. Tonight is crucial for this hotel, he said. Our guests expect perfection. You smile, you serve, and you stay invisible. No mistakes. No conversations unless they speak to you first. Is that clear? Everyone nodded. Elena had heard this speech before. Stay invisible. That was the rule. Rich people didn't want to think about who was serving them. They wanted their champagne to appear as if by magic, their plates cleared without them noticing. The first guests started arriving at 6. Elena watched from the kitchen entrance as they swept through the lobby. The women wore gowns that probably cost more than Elena's car. Diamonds glittered at their throats and wrists. The men looked sharp in expensive tuxedos, their shoes so polished they reflected the chandelier lights. Elena straightened her simple black server's uniform and tied her hair back tighter. Her reflection in the kitchen's steel doors showed a tired young woman with dark circles under her eyes. She'd been up late the night before, helping her younger brother with his homework after finishing her shift. Then she'd stayed up even later, working on her second job doing data entry online. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Elena, you're on champagne duty, called out Lisa, the head server. Start with the east side of the room and work your way around. And for heaven's sake, smile. Elena picked up a tray of crystal flutes, each one filled with golden bubbles. The tray was heavy, but her arms had grown strong from years of this work. She pushed through the doors into the ballroom, her face arranged in a pleasant, neutral expression. The noise hit her first. Laughter and conversation bounced off the high ceilings. Women air-kissed each other while men shook hands and slapped backs. Everyone seemed to know everyone else. It was like a club Elena could never join, no matter how many times she served them. She moved through the crowd smoothly, offering champagne. Most people took a glass without even looking at her. A few muttered thanks. Most said nothing at all. She was invisible, just like Mr. Peterson wanted. Near the grand piano, a group of women had gathered. They were all around 50 or 60, dripping in jewelry that probably had its own security detail. Their laughter was loud and sharp. Did you see Patricia's dress? One of them said. I heard it's vintage Chanel. Must have cost a fortune. Well, she can afford it after that divorce settlement, another replied, and they all laughed again. Elena carefully offered them champagne. As she reached across with the tray, one of the women turned suddenly. Her elbow knocked into the tray, making the glasses clink dangerously. Elena's reflexes saved it, steadying the tray just in time. The woman looked at Elena as if noticing her for the first time. Careful, girl, she said coldly. These glasses are worth more than you make in a month. Heat flooded Elena's face. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, ma'am. The woman had already turned back to her friends, dismissing Elena completely. But Elena stood there for just a second longer because her eyes had caught something. The piano. She could see it clearly from where she stood. The lid was open, revealing the strings inside. The keys seemed to glow under the stage lights. Her fingers tingled. She remembered what it felt like to sit at a piano bench, to let her fingers dance across those keys, to lose herself completely in the music. It had been so long. 3 years. 3 years since she'd played anything more complicated than chopsticks on her brother's plastic keyboard. Miss? Miss, can I have one of those? A man in a tuxedo was gesturing at her tray. Elena snapped back to reality. Of course, sir. I apologize. She continued her rounds, refilling her tray twice more as the guests kept drinking and talking. Bits of conversation floated around her. Stock tips, vacation homes, private schools for children and grandchildren. A world so far removed from her own that it might as well be another planet. At 7 o'clock, Mr. Peterson signaled the servers to begin guiding guests to their tables. Dinner was about to start. Elena helped seat people, pulled out chairs for women in gowns too tight to sit down easily, and made sure everyone had water glasses filled to the exact right level. From her position near the kitchen doors, Elena could see the whole room. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over everything. The guests settled into their seats, still chatting and laughing. On stage, the piano waited silently. Someone from the hotel staff had placed a small sign on an easel next to the piano. It announced tonight's performer, Viktor Kozlov, internationally renowned concert pianist. Elena had heard of him. Everyone who knew anything about classical music had heard of him. He'd played at Carnegie Hall. He'd performed for presidents and royalty. And tonight these people would get to hear him play while eating their $5,000 dinners. They'd probably talk through half the performance, Elena thought. They'd check their phones and whisper to each other and only applaud because that's what you're supposed to do. She pushed the bitter thought away. It wasn't fair to judge them. Maybe some of them really loved music. Maybe some of them would listen with their whole hearts. As the salad course was served, Elena found herself drawn back toward the stage area. She told herself she was just checking to make sure everything was perfect. But really, she just wanted to be near the piano. She ran her cleaning cloth over a nearby table that didn't need cleaning, her eyes on the instrument. The black surface was so polished she could almost see her reflection in it. Her fingers ached with the memory of keys beneath them, of the weight and resistance that was different from any other feeling in the world. Music had been everything to her once. It had been her language, her joy, her future, until it wasn't. Until life had other plans. Until the night that changed everything and took away the luxury of dreams. But tonight, for just a moment, standing in this beautiful room near this beautiful piano, Elena let herself remember. She remembered what it felt like to play, what it felt like to be someone other than a tired waitress trying to make ends meet. The memory was sweet and painful at the same time. The main course was being served when it happened. Elena was carrying a tray of dirty plates back to the kitchen, moving carefully between the crowded tables. She'd learned to make herself small in spaces like this, to slip through gaps without disturbing anyone's conversation or bumping anyone's chair. She was almost to the kitchen doors when she heard her name. Well, not exactly her name, but someone was definitely talking to the servers. You there? Girl in black. The voice was sharp and commanding. Elena turned. It was the same woman from earlier, the one who'd nearly made her drop the champagne tray. She was sitting at one of the best tables right near the stage. 3 other women sat with her, all dressed in designer gowns and dripping with jewelry. Elena set down her tray on a nearby service station and walked over. Yes, ma'am? How can I help you? The woman held up her wine glass. It still had wine in it, but apparently not enough. This needs a refill. And do try to pour it properly this time. The last server splashed some on the tablecloth. Elena hadn't been the one to pour the wine, but she knew better than to say so. Of course, ma'am. Right away. She fetched a bottle of the expensive red wine they were serving tonight and returned to the table. As she carefully poured, the woman continued her conversation with her friends, talking as if Elena wasn't even there. So anyway, Patricia, I told them absolutely not. If they can't get us a table at Le Bernardin, we simply won't attend their charity event. Standards, you know. Oh, absolutely, one of the other women agreed. One must maintain standards. Elena finished pouring and was about to leave when the third woman spoke up. She was younger than the others, maybe in her early 40s, with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Speaking of standards, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the stage, I do hope this pianist is worth the hype. I had to cancel my massage appointment to be here tonight. Oh, he's wonderful, the first woman said. I heard him perform in Vienna last year. Absolutely transcendent. Of course, one must understand classical music to truly appreciate it. The fourth woman, who'd been quiet until now, laughed. It was a tinkling, artificial sound. Well, that leaves out most of the population, doesn't it? I mean, can you imagine someone like... She paused and looked directly at Elena. Like the help here, understanding Rachmaninoff or Chopin. Elena felt her face grow hot. She should have left already, should have walked away the moment she finished pouring the wine. But she'd hesitated 1 second too long, and now she was trapped in this conversation. The first woman, the one who'd called her over, looked at Elena with an expression that might have been curiosity, but felt more like a scientist examining a bug. Tell me, dear, do you enjoy classical music? It was a trap. Elena knew it was a trap. If she said yes, they'd mock her for pretending to be cultured. If she said no, they'd laugh at her ignorance. There was no right answer. Some of it is very beautiful, ma'am, Elena said carefully, keeping her voice neutral and her face blank. Some of it, the woman repeated, and the whole table laughed. How charming. Yes, I suppose some of it is beautiful. Rather like saying some of Shakespeare's plays are quite nice, and more laughter. Elena's hands were shaking now, so she clasped them behind her back where the women couldn't see. The blonde woman leaned forward. Have you ever even been to a classical concert, dear? No, ma'am, it wasn't technically a lie. Elena had never attended a concert as a guest. She'd performed in dozens of them, but that was different. That was a lifetime ago. Of course not, the woman said, sitting back with a satisfied smile. No offense, sweetheart, but this kind of artistry is rather wasted on people who wouldn't know the difference between Beethoven and... She paused, thinking, and the Beatles. The table erupted in laughter again. They thought this was hilarious. The quiet fourth woman was laughing so hard she had to dab at her eyes with her napkin. Oh, that's perfect, she gasped. Beethoven and the Beatles. I must remember that one. Elena's throat felt tight. She wanted to say something, anything, to wipe those smug smiles off their faces. She wanted to tell them that she'd played Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique when she was 12, that she'd won the state junior competition with Chopin's Ballade No. 1, that she'd been accepted to the conservatory on a full scholarship, and had been called a prodigy by people who actually knew music, but she didn't say any of that. Because it didn't matter. That girl didn't exist anymore. That girl had died 3 years ago along with everything else. Will there be anything else, ma'am? Helena asked, proud that her voice came out steady. No, you can go, the first woman said, waving her hand dismissively. We wouldn't want to keep you from your important work. More laughter followed Elena as she walked away. Her face was burning and tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. She made it to the kitchen and set down the wine bottle with shaking hands. Thomas was there, arranging dessert plates. You okay? He asked, noticing her expression. Fine, Elena lied. Just fine, but she wasn't fine. She was furious and hurt and humiliated. The worst part was that they had no idea what they'd just done. To them, it had been a moment of light entertainment, a funny joke to share over expensive wine. They'd forget about it before the main course was cleared, but Elena would remember. She'd remember the way they'd looked at her, like she was somehow less than human because she wore a server's uniform instead of a designer gown, like her worth could be measured by her bank account or her job title. She took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. Mr. Peterson walked past and gave her a sharp look. 5 minutes until the performance, he said. Make sure all the coffee stations are ready. And Elena? Whatever's bothering you, fix your face. The guests can't see it. Fix your face. Stay invisible. Keep smiling even when people treat you like dirt. Elena nodded and got back to work. She refilled coffee urns, arranged cream and sugar on small silver trays, and made sure there were enough dessert spoons at each station. Her hands moved on autopilot while her mind churned. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the performance was about to begin. The guests' chatter quieted down. Elena positioned herself near the back of the room where she could watch if needed, but wouldn't be in the way. The hotel's event coordinator walked onto the stage, microphone in hand. He was a cheerful man named Robert who always had a smile ready. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice booming through the sound system. "I hope you've all enjoyed your dinner. And now the moment you've been waiting for. It is my distinct honor to introduce tonight's performer, a virtuoso who has graced the finest concert halls around the world. Please join me in welcoming the magnificent Viktor Kozlov." The room exploded in applause. People were actually standing up, giving a standing ovation before the man had even played a single note. Elena watched from the back, her arms crossed over her chest. But something was wrong. The applause continued, but no one walked onto the stage. Robert stood there, still smiling, but Elena could see confusion starting to creep into his expression. He gestured toward the wings, expecting the pianist to emerge. Nothing happened. The applause began to falter, people looking at each other uncertainly. Robert's smile was looking more strained by the second. Then Mr. Peterson rushed onto the stage, moving faster than Elena had ever seen him move. He whispered something urgently in Robert's ear. Even from the back of the room, Elena could see the color drain from Robert's face. Robert turned back to the microphone, his professional smile now clearly forced. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please excuse us for just one moment. A slight technical difficulty. We'll begin the performance shortly." The lights came back up slightly, and the confused murmuring of 400 wealthy people filled the ballroom. Elena watched as Mr. Peterson and Robert disappeared backstage, followed quickly by several other staff members. Something had gone very wrong. And judging by the panic on Mr. Peterson's face, it was something big. The women at the table near the stage were talking loudly enough for Elena to hear from where she stood. "How unprofessional," the first woman said. "At $5,000 a plate, you'd think they could manage to start on time." "Typical," agreed the blonde. "Standards really have fallen everywhere, haven't they?" Elena barely heard them. She was watching the stage, watching the beautiful piano sitting there under the lights, waiting for hands that apparently weren't coming. What could have happened to the famous Viktor Kozlov? Where was he? And more importantly, what was going to happen now? The minutes ticked by, 5, then 10. The wealthy guests were getting restless, their polite murmuring turning into louder complaints. Elena watched from her position near the coffee station as Mr. Peterson appeared and disappeared backstage 3 times, his face growing more panicked with each appearance. Robert kept returning to the microphone with updates that weren't really updates. "Just a few more minutes, folks. Thank you for your patience." His smile was starting to look like a grimace. Elena moved closer to the backstage area, pretending to check on some empty tables nearby. That's when she heard it, voices raised in barely controlled panic behind the heavy curtain. "I don't care what you have to do, find me a pianist." That was Mr. Peterson, and Elena had never heard him sound so desperate. "Call everyone, anyone, someone who can play something, anything." "Sir, I've called every pianist in the city." That was Robert, his voice cracking slightly. "Everyone who's any good is either already performing somewhere else tonight or can't get here in time. The traffic is insane because of that accident on the highway." "What accident?" Mr. Peterson sounded like he might cry. "The one that Kozlov was in, sir. His car got rear-ended about 20 minutes from here. He's fine, just shaken up, but there's no way he can perform. He said his hands are trembling too much." There was a moment of terrible silence. Then Mr. Peterson spoke again, his voice hollow. "Do you understand what this means? Do you understand what happens if we don't deliver what we promised? Mr. Rothschild himself is sitting out there. Half the city's most powerful people are out there. They paid $5,000 a ticket expecting a world-class performance. I know, sir, I know, but I don't know what else to do." Elena heard footsteps and quickly moved away, busying herself with straightening chairs that didn't need straightening. Her heart was pounding. An accident. The famous pianist wasn't coming, and they had no backup plan. She glanced toward the table where those awful women sat. They were complaining loudly now, making sure everyone around them could hear their displeasure. "This is absolutely unacceptable," the first woman announced. "I could have gone to the opera tonight instead. I canceled my plans for this." Around the room, other guests were checking their phones, making their own calls, probably trying to find other places to be. Mr. Rothschild, a silver-haired man in an impeccable tuxedo, was standing near the stage with a face like thunder. He was one of the richest men in the state, the kind of man who could shut down a hotel with one bad review. Elena's mind was racing. She knew what she had to do. She'd known from the moment she'd heard there was no pianist. But knowing what you should do and actually doing it were two very different things. Her hands felt clammy. Her heart was beating so fast she thought people might hear it. What if she'd forgotten everything? What if 3 years away from a real piano had eroded all that skill? What if she sat down at that beautiful Steinway and her fingers refused to work? Worse, what if she played and it was just okay? What if she was good enough not to embarrass herself but not good enough to make up for the missing maestro? These people were expecting Victor Kozlov, a legend. What would they think if they got Elena Rodriguez, a waitress, instead? But then she thought about Mr. Peterson. He'd been kind to her in his way. He'd given her extra shifts when her brother needed expensive medication. He'd looked the other way when she'd shown up late a few times after particularly rough nights, and she thought about all the other servers who depended on this job. If tonight was a disaster, if the hotel's reputation tanked, they might all be looking for work. Before she could talk herself out of it, Elena walked toward the backstage area. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. She pushed through the heavy curtain. Mr. Peterson was slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. Robert was on his phone, probably making yet another fruitless call. 2 other staff members stood nearby, looking lost and helpless. "Mr. Peterson?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. He looked up, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Elena, not now. We have a situation." "I know, sir, I heard. About the pianist. Then you understand why I don't have time for whatever this is." He started to turn away. "I can play." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Mr. Peterson froze. Slowly he turned back to look at her. "What did you say?" "The piano. I can play it. I know it's not ideal, but I can do it. I can give them a performance." Robert had hung up his phone and was staring at her. The other staff members looked confused. Mr. Peterson's expression was hard to read. "Elena," he said carefully, "this isn't a hotel lounge where someone plays soft background music. These people are expecting a concert-level performance. They're expecting Rachmaninoff, Chopin, Liszt. Do you even know who those composers are?" The question stung, even though she knew he didn't mean it cruelly. He was just being realistic. "Yes, sir. I know them. I can play their work. You can play—" Mr. Peterson trailed off. He looked at Robert, who shrugged helplessly. "Elena, I appreciate the offer, but this is serious. If we put someone out there who can't deliver, we'll look even worse than if we just canceled." "I understand, sir. But what other choice do you have?" It was a fair question, and they all knew it. Mr. Peterson stood up, running his hands through his gray hair. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she'd started working there. "Can you really play?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir. I really can. How well?" Elena hesitated. "How did you explain years of training, competitions, scholarships, dreams? How did you tell someone that you used to be somebody completely different?" "Well enough," she finally said. Mr. Peterson glanced at his watch. They'd already kept the guests waiting 15 minutes. Much longer, and people would start walking out. He looked back at Elena, and she could see him weighing his options. A certain disaster if they canceled, or a possible disaster if he let a waitress try to fill in for one of the world's best pianists. "Fine," he said finally. "But Elena, if you get out there and you can't do this, you're fired. Do you understand? I can't afford to look like I'm making a joke out of this situation." "I understand, sir. What will you play?" Elena thought fast. She needed something impressive but not so technically demanding that she'd mess up after 3 years away from a real piano. Something with emotion that would connect with the audience. Something that would make them forget, at least for a little while, that they weren't hearing Victor Kozlov. "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, she said. "The first movement." Robert's eyes went wide. That's one of the most difficult pieces in classical repertoire." "I know." Mr. Peterson looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. "You're sure about this?" No, she wasn't sure at all. She was terrified. But she nodded anyway. "Yes, sir." "Then we're out of time. Robert, make the announcement. Don't mention that she's staff. Just say we have a special surprise performer." He turned to Elena. "You have exactly 2 minutes. Do whatever you need to do to get ready." Elena nodded and walked toward the stage entrance. Her whole body was shaking now. She could hear Robert walking back out to the microphone, his voice booming through the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience. I'm afraid Mr. Kozlov has been delayed due to an unexpected situation. However, we have a very special surprise for you this evening. A talented performer who has graciously agreed to step in at the last moment. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. Elena could hear the skepticism, the annoyance. She stood in the wings, hidden by the curtain, staring at the piano on the stage. 3 years. It had been 3 years since she'd played on a stage. 3 years since she'd been that girl with the bright future and the scholarship and the dreams. That girl had played without fear because she'd had nothing to lose. Now Elena had everything to lose. Her job, her dignity, maybe even her memories of who she used to be. But there was no turning back now. Robert was finishing his introduction. Please welcome our surprise performer for this evening. This was it. Elena took one deep breath, smoothed down her simple black server's uniform and stepped out onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding. Elena had forgotten how bright stage lights could be, how they made everything beyond them disappear into darkness. She couldn't see individual faces in the audience anymore, just shapes and shadows. But she could feel them. 400 pairs of eyes all focused on her. The murmuring started immediately. It rippled through the crowd like a wave, growing louder with each step she took toward the piano. She could hear the confusion, the surprise, and yes, the mockery already beginning. Is that one of the servers? What is this, some kind of joke? I did not pay $5,000 for this. Elena kept walking. Her legs felt wooden, mechanical, but they kept moving. One step, then another. The piano was only 20 feet away, but it felt like miles. She was intensely aware of how she must look to them. Her simple black uniform, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, her shoes, comfortable work shoes instead of elegant heels, no makeup except a bit of mascara, no jewelry except the cheap watch on her wrist that she needed to keep track of her shifts. She looked exactly like what she was. A waitress, the help, someone who should be clearing their plates, not performing for them. The laughter started before she even reached the piano bench. It wasn't loud, raucous laughter. It was worse than that. It was the polite, stifled kind. The kind where people put their hands over their mouths and turned to their neighbors, whispering and giggling. Elena's face burned. She could see the table where those awful women sat, front and center near the stage. The first woman, the one who'd mocked her earlier, was actually laughing out loud now. Her face was bright with amusement. "Oh, this is rich," she said, not even bothering to lower her voice. "This is their solution? The waitress is going to entertain us?" Her friends were laughing too. The blonde woman was shaking her head in disbelief. "I can't believe this. I actually can't believe this is happening." Around the room, more laughter joined in. People weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Some were pulling out their phones, probably to record what they thought would be an embarrassing disaster, something to share later, to laugh about at their next dinner party. Elena reached the piano bench and stood there for a moment, her hand on the polished wood. She could walk away. She could turn around right now, apologize, and disappear backstage. She'd be fired anyway, but at least she wouldn't have to endure whatever was about to happen. But then she thought about her little brother, Danny. He was home right now, probably doing his homework at their tiny kitchen table. He didn't know his big sister was about to either humiliate herself in front of the city's elite, or prove that she was more than they could ever imagine. Danny still believed in her. Even after everything they'd lost, even after all the dreams that had died, he still looked at her like she hung the moon. She couldn't let him down. More than that, she couldn't let herself down. Elena sat down on the bench. The leather was smooth and cool beneath her. She adjusted her position slightly, the way she'd been taught years ago. Back straight, shoulders relaxed, feet flat on the floor. Her hands hovered over the keys. They were shaking. She could see them trembling in the bright stage light. 3 years. 3 years since she'd touched a real piano. What if her body had forgotten? What if all that muscle memory had faded away? The laughter in the audience was dying down a little. People were curious now, waiting to see what would happen, waiting for the show, for the inevitable failure they all expected. Elena closed her eyes. She blocked out the ballroom, the people, the laughter, the judgment. She went back in time, back to when she was 15 years old, sitting in a practice room at the conservatory. Her teacher, Mrs. Chen, standing beside her. "Music isn't about the notes, Elena," Mrs. Chen had said. "Any trained monkey can hit the right keys in the right order. Music is about emotion. It's about truth. When you sit down to play, you must be willing to bare your soul. You must be willing to be vulnerable. Elena had understood it intellectually then, but she'd been 15, talented and confident with a bright future stretching out before her. What did she know about vulnerability? What did she know about real pain? She knew now. She'd learned it the hard way, the night her parents' house caught fire. The night she'd lost everything except Danny. She'd learned about grief and loss and the kind of pain that hollows you out from the inside. She'd learned what it meant to sacrifice your dreams, to put them in a box and hide them away because survival mattered more. And now, sitting at this piano in her server's uniform while rich people laughed at her, she understood what Mrs. Chen had meant, because she had nothing left to hide. No reputation to protect, no image to maintain. She was already at rock bottom. The only direction left was up. Elena opened her eyes. Her hands were still shaking, but she placed them on the keys anyway. The ivory was smooth and familiar beneath her fingertips. She took a deep breath. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. One of the most technically demanding, emotionally complex pieces ever written. Rachmaninoff had composed it while battling depression, after a period when he thought he'd never write music again. It was a piece about despair and hope, about darkness and light, about finding beauty even in the depths of suffering. Elena had played it for her final recital at the conservatory, right before everything fell apart. She'd been 17 and she'd thought she understood the piece. She'd been wrong. You couldn't understand Rachmaninoff's second until you'd lived through your own darkness, until you'd known what it felt like to lose everything and keep going anyway. The audience was getting restless again. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered something that made their whole table laugh. Elena didn't hear them. She was somewhere else now. Somewhere beyond this ballroom and these people. Her fingers found their starting position. The opening of the concerto. Those deep, resonant chords that sounded like bells tolling. Just before she began, she heard one last comment from the blonde woman at the front table. The woman's voice dripped with sarcasm and contempt. Well, this should be entertaining. I wonder if she even knows how to read music. More laughter. Someone else chimed in. $5 says she plays Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Elena's jaw tightened. Fine. Let them laugh. Let them mock. Let them think whatever they wanted. They were about to learn something important. They were about to learn that you couldn't judge a person's worth by their job or their clothes or their bank account. She pressed down on the first chord. The sound that came from the Steinway was deep and rich, filling the entire ballroom with its resonance. It was perfect. The piano was perfectly tuned, perfectly maintained, probably the best instrument Elena had ever played. She held the chord, letting it ring out into the silence. Then she began. The opening of Rachmaninoff's second is slow, almost mournful. It builds gradually, chord by chord, like someone emerging from darkness into light. Elena's hands moved across the keys and it was like coming home. The 3 years fell away. Her fingers remembered everything, but something was different now. When she'd played this piece at 17, it had been technically perfect but emotionally young. She'd hit every note correctly, but she hadn't really understood what the music was saying. Now she understood. Every chord carried the weight of her own experiences. The grief of losing her parents, the fear of not being able to provide for Danny, the exhaustion of working 2 jobs, the loneliness of giving up everything she'd loved, the shame of being invisible, of being treated like she didn't matter. All of it poured into the music. Her hands flew across the keys, fingers dancing through runs that would have been impossible for most pianists. But Elena wasn't thinking about technique anymore. She wasn't thinking about anything except the story the music was telling, the story of someone who'd fallen and gotten back up, someone who'd lost everything and found the strength to keep going, someone who'd been broken and was slowly, painfully putting the pieces back together. The laughter in the audience had stopped. Elena barely noticed. She was lost in the music now, in the conversation between her hands and the piano, between Rachmaninoff's genius and her own lived experience. The first movement of the concerto was about 12 minutes long. 12 minutes to prove she was more than they thought. 12 minutes to show them who she really was. 12 minutes to remember who she used to be and decide who she wanted to become. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Not the polite quiet of an audience during a performance, but something deeper, a stunned, breathless silence that felt almost sacred. Elena's eyes were closed now. She'd stopped seeing the ballroom, the lights, the audience minutes ago. There was only the music and the piano and her hands moving across the keys like they'd never stopped. Like the past 3 years had been just a brief pause rather than a lifetime. The piece moved through its first major transition, from the melancholy opening into something more urgent, more desperate. Her left hand pounded out the bass notes while her right hand flew through a cascade of notes that sounded like rain, like tears, like everything she'd held inside for so long. This was the section where most pianists struggled. The technical demands were brutal. Your hands had to move independently, playing completely different rhythms and melodies at the same time. Your fingers had to stretch across intervals that felt impossible. You had to maintain perfect control while playing with intense emotion. Elena's hands did it all without her even thinking about it. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath 3 years of carrying serving trays and scrubbing tables. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Out in the audience, people were frozen. The woman who'd mocked Elena earlier sat with her mouth slightly open, her glass of wine forgotten in her hand. Her friends had similar expressions: shock, disbelief, and something else, something that might have been shame. At the back of the room, Mr. Peterson stood with tears running down his face. He'd hired Elena 3 years ago because she'd needed a job and he'd had an opening. He'd thought she was just another struggling young person trying to make ends meet. He'd had no idea. None at all. Thomas, the server who'd been working there for years, stood next to him. "Did you know?" he whispered. Mr. Peterson shook his head, unable to speak. The music built to the first major climax. This was the moment when the piece transformed from sorrow into something more powerful. Hope, maybe, or defiance. The refusal to give up even when everything seems lost. Elena's whole body was engaged now. Her shoulders swayed slightly with the rhythm. Her foot pressed the pedals with perfect timing, creating layers of sound that made the piano seem like an entire orchestra. Every muscle, every movement was focused on pulling the music from this instrument. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the air conditioning. This piece was physically exhausting even for concert pianists at the top of their game. Her arms were starting to ache, her fingers cramping slightly. But she pushed through it. Pain didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting to the end, except telling the whole story. In the third row, Mr. Rothschild sat completely still. He'd been furious 10 minutes ago, ready to destroy this hotel's reputation over the disaster with the missing pianist. He'd been checking his phone, composing angry emails in his head. Now his phone sat dark on the table in front of him, forgotten. He'd heard the world's best pianists perform in the finest concert halls. He'd heard this very piece played by maestros with decades of experience and international acclaim. This was different. This wasn't just technically perfect playing, though it was certainly that. This was raw and real in a way that professional performances often weren't. Whoever this young woman was, she wasn't just playing the notes. She was living them, breathing them, bleeding them. The piece moved into a softer section, a moment of reflection and beauty. Elena's hands gentled on the keys, coaxing out notes that sounded like whispered secrets, like prayers said in the dark when no one else is listening. This was the part that had always made her cry when she was younger, back when Mrs. Chen was teaching her. The part where Rachmaninoff seemed to be saying that even in the deepest darkness there could be moments of grace. Moments of unexpected beauty. Moments when the world stopped being cruel and showed you something lovely. Elena thought about those moments in her own life. Danny's laughter when she came home after a long shift. The way the sunrise looked from their apartment window on the rare mornings when she wasn't too exhausted to notice it. The elderly regular at the hotel who always remembered to ask how she was doing, and seemed to genuinely care about the answer. Small things. Tiny lights in the darkness. But lights nonetheless. Her fingers moved through a particularly complex passage, a conversation between her right and left hand that sounded like two voices answering each other. Question and response. Call and echo. It was one of the most beautiful sections of the piece, and Elena played it with such tenderness that several people in the audience found themselves crying without quite knowing why. The blonde woman who joked about Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star, had tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, ruining her makeup. She didn't care. She couldn't look away from the stage, from this woman in a server's uniform who was somehow creating magic. Who is she? Someone whispered from a nearby table. I don't know, came the response. But oh my God, The music built again, moving toward the final section. This was where Rachmaninoff pulled out all the stops, demanding everything the pianist had left to give. Speed, power, precision, emotion, all at once, all perfectly balanced. Elena's hands were flying now, moving so fast they were almost a blur. The notes poured out like a waterfall, like a storm, like everything beautiful and terrible and overwhelming all at once. Her whole body ached. Her fingers felt like they might give out at any second, but she was almost there. Almost at the end. Just a little further. The audience leaned forward in their seats, collectively holding their breath. Even the waiters and staff who'd been standing along the walls had stopped what they were doing, drawn in by the music. This was the moment that separated good pianists from great ones. The final push, the last climb, where you had to give everything you had and somehow find even more, where you had to reach inside yourself and pull out every ounce of emotion, every bit of technique, every single thing you'd ever learned or felt or experienced. Elena reached that place. The place beyond exhaustion, beyond fear, beyond everything except the music itself. Her hands knew what to do. Her body knew. Every lesson she'd ever taken, every hour she'd ever practiced, every performance she'd ever given, it all came together in this moment. The piece raced toward its conclusion. Massive chords that made the piano ring like a bell, runs that sparkled like diamonds. Power and beauty and truth all woven together in Rachmaninoff's genius, and Elena's interpretation of it. She could feel it ending, the music building to that final resolution. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her vision was blurry with tears she didn't remember crying. Every part of her hurt, but it was a good hurt. The kind of pain that came from using muscles you'd forgotten you had, from pushing yourself further than you thought you could go. 3 more measures. 2. 1. Elena's hands came down on the final chord with all the strength she had left. The sound filled the entire ballroom, echoing off the high ceilings, resonating in everyone's chest. It was triumphant and defiant and beautiful. It said, "I survived. I'm still here. You didn't break me." She held the chord, letting it ring out until it faded naturally into silence. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and sat very still, her eyes still closed, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a single sound. 400 people sitting in perfect stillness. Elena opened her eyes. The stage lights were still blinding, but she could see shapes in the audience now. All of them frozen, staring at her. What had she done? What had she just revealed about herself? There was no taking it back now. Everyone had seen. Everyone knew she wasn't just a waitress, that she'd never been just a waitress. Her hands were shaking again as she started to stand up from the piano bench. Her legs felt weak. She wasn't sure they would hold her. Then someone started clapping, just one person at first. Then another, and then the entire ballroom exploded. The sound of 400 people applauding at once was like thunder. It rolled over Elena in waves so loud it was almost physical. She stood beside the piano, her legs still shaking, completely overwhelmed by what was happening. They were standing. All of them. Every single person in that ballroom had risen to their feet. Their hands came together in rhythm, creating a sound that seemed to shake the chandeliers. Some people were shouting. Others had tears streaming down their faces. Elena just stood there, frozen. She didn't know what to do with her hands. Where to look. How to process what was happening. This wasn't possible. 5 minutes ago, these same people had been laughing at her, making jokes, treating her like she was nothing. Now they were giving her the kind of ovation usually reserved for legends. The first woman, the one who'd been so cruel earlier, was clapping harder than anyone. Her face was red, whether from emotion or shame, Elena couldn't tell. Tears ran down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. The blonde woman next to her wasn't even trying to hide that she was crying. She was sobbing openly, her hands pressed to her mouth. At the back of the room, Mr. Peterson was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. He was laughing and crying at the same time, shaking his head in disbelief. Thomas stood next to him, whooping and cheering like he was at a rock concert instead of a classical performance. Mr. Rothschild, the powerful real estate mogul who could make or break businesses with a single phone call, was on his feet with everyone else. His stern face had transformed into something Elena had never seen before. Joy, pure, unfiltered joy. He was clapping with such enthusiasm that the people around him were staring. The applause continued. 1 minute, 2, 3. Elena had heard about standing ovations that lasted a long time, but she'd never experienced one. It felt surreal, like she was watching it happen to someone else. She tried to bow the way she'd been taught years ago, a simple, graceful acknowledgement of the audience's appreciation. But her bow was shaky, uncertain. She wasn't that confident young performer anymore. She was a waitress who'd just done something impossible. The applause grew even louder somehow, if that was possible. People were whistling now, cheering. Some were holding up their phones, having recorded the whole thing. The footage would be all over social media within hours, but Elena didn't know that yet. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the applause began to fade. People sat back down, but they were still talking excitedly. The energy in the room had completely changed. It was electric, alive in a way it hadn't been before. Elena turned to walk off stage, her whole body trembling. She just wanted to disappear backstage, to process what had just happened in private. But she'd only taken 2 steps when a voice called out from the audience. "Wait, please wait." It was the first woman, the cruel one. She was standing again, one hand raised like she was in school trying to get the teacher's attention. Her friends looked mortified, trying to pull her back down to her seat, but she shook them off. "Please," she called out again. We all need to know. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air. The whole ballroom went quiet again, everyone waiting for Elena's answer. She stood there in the spotlight, still in her simple black uniform, her hair still pulled back in its practical bun. Who was she? That was the question, wasn't it? Was she Elena Rodriguez, the waitress? Or was she Elena Rodriguez, the pianist? Could she be both? And did she even want to try? Before she could answer, Mr. Peterson rushed onto the stage. He looked at Elena with wonder and something that might have been apology. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "this is Elena Rodriguez. She's been working at our hotel for 3 years. A murmur ran through the crowd. 3 years. They'd been coming to this hotel for years. How many times had Elena served them without them ever really seeing her? Mr. Peterson continued. I'll be honest with you all. I had no idea. I had no idea she could do this. We're as amazed as you are. The blonde woman stood up now too. Her voice cracked when she spoke. Miss Rodriguez, I need to apologize. I said terrible things to you earlier. We all did. We mocked you. We judged you based on your uniform and your job. I am so sorry. Her voice broke completely on the last word. She sat down abruptly, covering her face with her hands. The woman next to her put an arm around her shoulders. Elena didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to be gracious, to accept the apology and move on. But another part of her was still angry, still hurt by the way they'd treated her, like she was less than human just because she served them food. More people were standing now. A man in an expensive suit raised his hand. I work for the city's Philharmonic, he said. Miss Rodriguez, I would very much like to speak with you about performing with us. That was extraordinary. A woman in a red gown stood next. I'm on the board of the conservatory. If you'd be interested in completing your studies, I think we could arrange a full scholarship. More voices joined in, all offering things. Opportunities, chances, the kind of things that could change a person's entire life. Elena felt dizzy. It was too much, too fast. 10 minutes ago, she'd been invisible. Now everyone wanted a piece of her. Mr. Rothschild made his way to the front of the room. People parted for him automatically. He was that kind of person, the kind who commanded respect just by existing. He climbed the steps to the stage and walked over to Elena. Up close, he was shorter than he seemed from a distance, but no less intimidating. He looked at her with sharp, assessing eyes. Miss Rodriguez, he said quietly, how long have you been able to play like that? Since I was a child, sir, Elena managed. Her voice sounded small and far away. And you've been working as a server here for 3 years? Yes, sir. He was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he shook his head slowly. That's a crime, he said. A genuine crime. Talent like that, hidden away because life is unfair and cruel. He paused. I'd like to help change that if you'll let me. Elena didn't know what to say to that either. This whole night had stopped making sense. She felt like she was in a dream. One of those vivid dreams where impossible things happen and you just go along with it, because what else can you do? The audience was still watching, waiting. Elena could feel their eyes on her. their expectations pressing down like a physical weight. They wanted her to be grateful, to be excited, to jump at all these opportunities they were suddenly offering. But all she could think about was Danny, home alone doing his homework. Danny, who depended on her steady paycheck from the hotel. Danny, who needed his medication and his doctor's appointments and stability. These people could offer her the world tonight. But would they still be there tomorrow? Next week, next month? Or would they move on to the next exciting thing, leaving her in an even worse position than before? Elena started, then stopped. Everyone leaned forward, hanging on her words. I need to think about all of this. It's very overwhelming. Mr. Rothschild nodded, looking pleased rather than offended. Smart, he said. Don't make big decisions when you're emotional. Here. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. Call me tomorrow. We'll talk about what you need and what I can offer. No pressure. No strings. Just a conversation. He shook her hand firmly, then walked back down the stage steps. But before he returned to his seat, he turned back to face the audience. I think we can all agree that tonight turned out far better than expected. Let's give Miss Rodriguez one more round of applause. The ballroom erupted again. Elena stood in the spotlight, clutching Mr. Rothschild's business card, feeling like her entire world had just been picked up, shaken like a snow globe, and set back down in a completely different configuration. When the applause finally died down and she was able to escape backstage, she found Mr. Peterson waiting for her. He pulled her into an unexpected hug. Elena, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you say something? Would it have mattered? Elena asked, pulling back. Would you have hired me to play piano instead of serve tables? He opened his mouth, then closed it. They both knew the answer. No, the hotel needed servers, not pianists. Her talent wouldn't have changed anything. Until tonight, when circumstances had forced it into the light. Well, he said finally, it matters now. Elena woke up the next morning to her phone buzzing nonstop. She grabbed it from the nightstand, squinting at the bright screen. 43 missed calls, over 100 text messages. What on earth? Then she remembered. Last night. The piano. The performance that had changed everything. She sat up in bed, her body aching. Her hands were sore, her shoulders tight. She'd used muscles last night that she hadn't used in years. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional exhaustion. She felt wrung out, like someone had taken every feeling inside her and squeezed it all out. Elena. Danny's voice came from the doorway. Her little brother stood there in his school uniform, his backpack already on his shoulders. Are you okay? You got home really late last night. I'm fine, Danny, just tired. Did you eat breakfast? Yeah, but Elena, your phone won't stop making noise. Is something wrong? She looked at the messages. Most were from numbers she didn't recognize. A few were from people at work. Thomas had sent about 10 messages, all variations of "Oh my God" and "Call me." Lisa, the head server, had sent a link to a video with the words, "You're famous." Elena clicked the link with shaking hands. It was her. Last night. Someone had recorded the entire performance and posted it online. The video already had over 1 million views. 1 million views. In less than 12 hours. Danny, you're going to be late for school, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Go on, I'll see you this afternoon. But go, everything's fine. I promise. After he left, Elena sat in bed and scrolled through the messages. Most were congratulations from people she barely knew. Some were from reporters asking for interviews. 3 were from television producers wanting her to appear on morning shows. And there was one from Mr. Rothschild's assistant, confirming a meeting at his office at 2 o'clock if she was still interested. Elena set the phone down and went to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. Same tired face, same dark circles under her eyes, same person she'd been yesterday morning, except everything was different now. She showered and dressed in her only nice outfit, a simple navy dress she'd bought at a thrift store for her interview 3 years ago. Then she made herself coffee and tried to think clearly about what had happened and what it meant. The performance had changed people's perception of her. That was obvious. But had it changed who she actually was? Was she suddenly different just because other people saw her differently now? No, she was still Elena Rodriguez. Still Danny's sister and only guardian. Still someone who had bills to pay and responsibilities that didn't disappear just because she'd played a piano really well. The morning passed in a blur of phone calls. Elena talked to 3 different reporters, all asking the same questions. How long had she been playing? Why was she working as a waitress? What were her plans now? She didn't have good answers for most of them. She told them the basic facts. Started playing at age 5. Won competitions as a kid. Got into the conservatory on scholarship. Had to drop out when her parents died and she became responsible for Danny. They all seemed to love that part. The tragedy. The struggle. It made for a better story, she supposed. Girl loses everything, gives up her dreams, then gets a miraculous second chance. Very dramatic. Very compelling. But they didn't ask about the hard parts. The nights she'd cried herself to sleep, missing her parents so much it felt like her chest was being crushed. The times she'd had to choose between buying groceries and buying Danny's medication. The exhaustion of working 2 jobs while trying to be a good guardian to a grief-stricken 10-year-old boy. They didn't want to hear about that. They just wanted the fairy tale ending. At 1:30, Elena took the bus downtown to Mr. Rothschild's office. The building was one of those glass towers that seemed to touch the sky. The lobby alone was bigger than her apartment, all marble floors and modern art. The receptionist looked at her with barely concealed surprise. Elena knew what she was thinking. She didn't look like the kind of person who had meetings in places like this. Her thrift store dress and worn shoes gave her away. But the receptionist checked her computer and said, "Miss Rodriguez." "Yes, Mr. Rothschild is expecting you. 23rd floor." The elevator was made of glass, so Elena could watch the ground fall away beneath her as she rose higher and higher. By the time she reached the 23rd floor, her stomach was doing flips that had nothing to do with the height. Mr. Rothschild's assistant met her at the elevator. She was a polished woman in her 30s, all efficiency and perfectly styled hair. "Miss Rodriguez, please follow me." She led Elena through a maze of hallways to a corner office with windows that overlooked the entire city. Mr. Rothschild stood by those windows, looking out at the view. He turned when they entered. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be nice. Thank you." The assistant brought her a glass and then disappeared, closing the door behind her. Elena sat in the leather chair and tried not to feel completely out of her depth. Mr. Rothschild sat across from her, not behind his desk, which somehow made things feel less intimidating. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," he said. "And I've been watching that video that's going around." "You've seen it?" "Yes, sir. Over 2 million views now. By tomorrow, it'll probably be 10 million. You've become what they call viral." He smiled slightly. "Do you understand what that means for you?" Elena shook her head. "Not really. It means opportunity, the kind that doesn't come around often. People want to hear your story. They want to see you perform. You could have a career, Miss Rodriguez. A real career as a pianist." He leaned forward. "But you'll need help navigating all of this. Management, PR, legal representation. That's where I come in." "Why would you want to help me?" Elena asked. "You don't know me." "True, but I know talent when I see it. And I know a good investment." He must have seen something in her face because he quickly added, "I don't mean that callously. Yes, I think helping you could be profitable for both of us. But that's not the only reason. Last night you gave me something I haven't felt in a long time. You made me remember why music matters, why art matters. That's worth something." Elena took a sip of water, buying time to think. "What exactly are you offering?" "I want to set up a foundation in your name. Its purpose will be to help talented young musicians who can't afford proper training. We'll start with a scholarship fund, but eventually we could do more. Performance opportunities, mentorship programs, whatever's needed. That sounds expensive. I can afford it, and more importantly, I believe in it." He pulled out a folder from the table beside him. "I've also taken the liberty of reaching out to some contacts. The Philharmonic wants you to perform as a guest soloist next month. The conservatory is willing to not only reinstate your scholarship, but also pay you a stipend so you can focus on your studies instead of working multiple jobs." Elena's head was spinning. It's too much. It's all happening too fast, I understand. But Elena, may I call you Elena?" She nodded. "Elena, opportunities like this are time-sensitive. Right now the world is paying attention. In a month they might move on to the next viral sensation. We need to act while people care." "I have responsibilities," Elena said quietly. "I have my brother. He's only 13. He depends on me. I can't just abandon my job at the hotel and hope everything works out. Mr. Rothschild nodded thoughtfully. What if I could guarantee it? What if the foundation pays you a salary, enough to cover all of Danny's needs and then some, health insurance included? Would that help? It would help. God, it would help more than he could know. But Elena had learned to be cautious about things that seemed too good to be true. Why? She asked again. Why are you doing this? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, my daughter was a musician, a violinist. She was incredibly talented. But I was so focused on building my business empire that I didn't encourage her. I told her music was a hobby, not a career. She gave it up to join the company, to make me proud. His voice went soft. She died 2 years ago. Car accident. And you want to know what I think about every single day? I think about how I never got to hear her play professionally. How I took that dream away from her. Elena saw the grief in his eyes and recognized it. She knew what it was like to lose people you loved, to have regrets you could never fix. I can't bring my daughter back, Mr. Rothschild continued, but I can make sure other talented people get the chance she never had. So that's why. That's really why. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elena said, can I think about it? Just for a day or two? Of course. Take all the time you need. Well, not all the time. A few days at least. He smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Here's my private number. Call me when you decide. Elena left his office feeling more confused than when she'd arrived. Elena spent the next 2 days in a fog. She went to work at the hotel, but everything felt different now. The other staff members treated her like she was made of glass, speaking to her carefully, asking if she needed anything. The guests who'd been at the gala recognized her and asked for autographs. It was surreal. Mr. Peterson called her into his office on the second day. Elena, I need to be honest with you. I can't keep you on as a server anymore. Her heart dropped. You're firing me? No, God, no. I'm saying you can't be a server when you should be our featured performer. I talked to corporate. They want to offer you a position as the hotel's resident pianist. Triple your current salary. You'd perform during special events, maybe a few evenings in the lounge. What do you think? It was a good offer. A safe offer. She could keep working at the hotel, have financial stability, and still play music. It wouldn't be the grand concert halls or the Philharmonic, but it would be something. A compromise between her old dreams and her current reality. That evening, Elena picked up Danny from his after-school program. They walked home together, Danny chattering about his day, a science test he thought he'd aced, a fight between 2 kids at lunch. Normal 13-year-old stuff. When they got home, Elena made them dinner. Spaghetti with jarred sauce, nothing fancy. They ate at their small kitchen table, the same table where Danny did his homework, and Elena paid bills, and they'd shared countless meals over the past 3 years. Danny, Elena said, after they'd finished eating. I need to talk to you about something. He looked up, his face suddenly worried. Are you sick? No, nothing like that. It's about what happened the other night. At the hotel? Oh, that. His face brightened. Elena, everyone at school has seen the video. They can't believe my sister is famous. It's actually pretty cool. I'm not famous, Danny. You kind of are. My friend's mom showed him the video and she cried. She said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. Elena felt her throat tighten. The thing is, some people want me to play more. Professionally. There are opportunities. Big ones, but taking them would mean changes. Big changes for both of us, Danny set down his fork. What kind of changes? I might have to perform a lot. Travel sometimes. Go back to school for music. It would be different from what we're used to. Would you be happy? Danny asked simply. The question caught her off guard. What, if you did those things? Would it make you happy? Elena thought about it. Really thought about it. I don't know, maybe. Music used to make me happy. But that was before. Before Mom and Dad died. Yeah. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think about them a lot, you know. And I think about you, how you gave up everything to take care of me. Your scholarship, your piano playing, everything. Danny, you're my brother. Of course I did, I know. But Elena, you've been taking care of me for 3 years. You've been amazing. The best sister anyone could ask for. But maybe it's time you did something for yourself too. You're 13. You still need me. I do need you. But I don't need you to give up your dreams for me. That's too much. It's too heavy. His eyes were shiny with tears now. I don't want to be the reason you're sad. You don't make me sad. You're the best thing in my life. Then let me be the reason you're brave instead, Danny said. Take the opportunities. Play music, be happy. We'll figure out the rest together. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. When had her little brother become so wise? What if I fail? What if I try this and it doesn't work out? Then at least you tried. That's better than wondering what if for the rest of your life. That night, after Danny went to bed, Elena sat at their tiny kitchen table with her phone. She pulled up Mr. Rothschild's number and stared at it for a long time. 3 years ago, her life had fallen apart. She'd lost her parents, her future, her identity. She'd become someone she never thought she'd be. A waitress. A guardian. A girl who was too tired and too scared to dream. But maybe Danny was right. Maybe it was time to be brave. She pressed call. Mr. Rothschild answered on the second ring. Elena, I was hoping you'd call. I want to do it, Elena said, her voice stronger than she expected. The foundation, the performances, all of it. But I have conditions. I'm listening. Danny comes first. Always. If he needs me, I need to be able to be there. No exceptions. Agreed. What else? I want to finish what I started at the conservatory. Get my degree. I need that. Not for anyone else, but for me. To prove I could do it. The conservatory is already willing to work with your schedule. We can make that happen. Elena took a deep breath. And I want to use some of the foundation's money to help other people like me. People who had to give up music because life got in the way. Not just kids, adults too. People who think it's too late for them. That's perfect, Mr. Rothschild said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. That's exactly the kind of vision this foundation needs. When can you start? I need to give the hotel 2 weeks' notice. Mr. Peterson has been good to me. I owe him that much. Fair enough. 2 weeks. Then we change your life. After she hung up, Elena sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. She thought about her parents, wondered what they would think of all this. She hoped they'd be proud. She hoped they'd understand that she'd done the best she could with the hand she'd been dealt. Then she got up and walked quietly to Danny's room. He was asleep, one arm thrown over his head, looking younger than 13. She stood in the doorway and watched him breathe. This kid who'd lost as much as she had but somehow stayed hopeful, somehow believed things could get better. Thank you, she whispered, for being brave enough for both of us. The next morning, Elena went to work at the hotel for her shift. She found Mr. Peterson in his office and told him about her decision. He listened quietly, nodding. I can't say I'm surprised, he said when she finished. Though I'll miss having you here. You've been one of my best employees. I'll work the next 2 weeks. Help train someone to replace me. About that? Mr. Peterson leaned back in his chair. I meant what I said about the pianist position. Even if you're doing all these other things, we'd love to have you perform here sometimes. Special events. Holiday parties. Whatever works with your schedule. This hotel is where your new life started. Seems right that you'd come back sometimes. Elena felt her eyes water. I'd like that. Thank you. For everything. For giving me a job when I needed one. For letting me play that night even when you thought it might be a disaster. Best decision I ever made, he said. Even if I didn't know it at the time. The 2 weeks passed quickly. Elena worked her shifts but spent her free time in meetings. She met with lawyers about contracts. With the conservatory about her course schedule. With the Philharmonic about her upcoming performance. With a PR person who helped her navigate the media attention that hadn't died down. The video of her performance had been viewed over 20 million times now. She'd been interviewed by national news programs. A classical music magazine wanted to do a feature story. A record label reached out about recording an album. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. On her last day at the hotel, the staff threw her a small party in the kitchen. They'd made a cake that said, "Good luck, Elena," in wobbly frosting letters. Thomas gave a speech that made everyone laugh and cry. Even Lisa, the tough head server who never showed emotion, hugged her and whispered, "Make us proud." But the most meaningful moment came from an unexpected source. As Elena was packing up her locker, the first woman from the gala appeared. The one who'd mocked her so cruelly. She looked different without her designer gown and jewelry. Smaller somehow. More human. "Miss Rodriguez," she said quietly. "I wanted to apologize again. In person, not just in front of a crowd. What I said to you that night was unforgivable. I judged you based on your job, your clothes, your position. I treated you as less than human, and I'm ashamed." Elena looked at her for a long moment. She could hold on to the anger. Part of her wanted to, but what would that accomplish? "I forgive you," Elena said. "We all make mistakes. We all judge people sometimes. The important thing is learning from it." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. And for what it's worth, I've already donated to the foundation. A significant amount. It's the least I can do." After she left, Elena finished packing her things. She took one last look at the locker that had been hers for 3 years. At the ballroom where everything had changed. At the piano on the stage waiting for the next performer. Then she walked out of the hotel not as a waitress but as a pianist. As herself. 6 months later, Elena stood backstage at the city's grand concert hall. She wore a deep blue gown that the foundation had bought for her. Her hair was styled professionally for the first time in years. In 30 minutes, she would walk onto that stage and perform with the Philharmonic Orchestra. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. From excitement, from joy, from the knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Danny was in the audience, sitting in the front row next to Mr. Rothschild. The conservatory had sent a whole group of students and faculty. Mr. Peterson and Thomas and Lisa had bought tickets. Even some of her old competitors from years ago had come to see her return. And in the seats of honor, she'd reserved 2 spots. Empty seats with programs placed on them. For her parents, she liked to think they were